Okay, awesome. Okay, then welcome. What is a prototype evaluation and how does it work? So, who am I and why should you care? I'm a lead artist. I'm a CEO of an art outsourcing agency. We do pitch decks and help indie studios or studios in general to receive more funding. I'm also a computer scientist. I wrote my thesis in theoretical implementation. I'm a freelance lead artist at the moment in a 1.6 funded games project funded by the German state. I also helped gamify the biggest Swiss music festival, the Hayate on Air. And what I'm personally most proud of is two hand painted murals in the heart of Berlin city. So if you ever visit Checkpoint Charlie in Berlin, then there are two relatively big walls that I painted. I also have LinkedIn and Twitter. If you want to connect or have questions, feel free to reach out. So, um, who is this talk for? This talk is mostly for people because I didn't know the audience all that well. I structured the talk into three categories. One that is really more for beginners to just get an overview of the entire game creation pipeline. And second, for a bit more intermediate, who maybe just want to figure out how they come into the bigger picture in terms of where their role is or how they fit into everything and maybe how they can contribute best to their company. And then also for people who are maybe indie devs or solo devs who just have or are looking for a structure to their prototyping and evaluation process. So let's jump right in into the overview. And I want to take you on a journey into product development. So it has to do a lot with problem versus solution. And I first want to break it down into why prototype in general. And the answer is basically to create a best possible game with the limited budget that you have. And that, uh, wait a second, I'll take this off. It just ran out of battery. That's a bit annoying. So, the best possible game with limited budget. So, let's say you want to create a game, then you really need to switch from the very passion driven, very creative expression driven thinking to a product development perspective. And that we see, or why I'm talking about this basically, is because a bit some time ago I made a poll about why game developers are game developing, and most of them said they are in it because of the creative expression, and they really like to, get into the technicalities. 0% said because of professionalism or because they want to, create a product or service. And then I had a second poll where I asked them, okay, what when you think of game development, what do you think about? And there really was a lot of passion and zero product and service development. So there is some disconnect there that a lot of people think, okay, gaming is somehow, or creating a game is somehow not a product or service. But right now we have this trend where we really go from a game as a product to a game as a service. So this is something you see with bigger companies. This could be subscriptions. This could be freemium. So like the biggest, best example would be Diablo right now, the mobile game. And a game as a product is basically just a flat price that you pay, and then you get a product in return, and then you never pay on top, maybe a DLC or something. but games as a service is basically anything that's paywalled in a sense. And then we have basically what we want to have is to have a problem. Well, we don't really want to have a problem, but the idea of the product development perspective is that you look as a game as a solution to a problem. So you want to have a niche of people that that don't really know that they have a problem. For example, there might be a niche of people who want to have, let's say, Barbie beat 'em up or something, like something really crazy. And so they really are craving this type of game, and you want to find them because them craving this game is the problem. There is no such game. I'm not sure if there is such a game, but um, they are craving this product, and creating this product would then be the solution. So then you have the problem space where your customers exist before they learn about your product, and then they have habits and rituals and needs and maybe desires and frustrations. And then you have the solution space where your product exists apart from your customer and from their needs and habits and so on. And your solution may or may not solve the customer's problems. Um, okay. So this might start out very or more complicated, but I promise we will all break it down until it's a bit easier and more digestible. Because what I want to create is basically just an overview. So we are talking about the same thing. And for this overview, I want to dive a bit more into the product development or game development pipeline. And I simplified three stages of conventional game development. So usually you start out in the pre-production where you have an idea and maybe you have some research data, and then you refine that one a little, and then you have maybe a game design document as an output. So this is the pre-production phase where you usually have a very small team, and this team is built up out of experts, usually a game producer, someone who has the vision, and a designer. And depending on what type of game you're producing, this could also be concept artists, this could be all types of other roles, really depending on the game. Then you have, as a second stage, the production stage. This is where you have the game design document that you maybe just created in the pre-production, and then you enter a development phase, and then you start testing, and you have as output maybe an MVP, that's a minimum viable product, or a vertical slice, or even a final product. So this also depends on the production you're in. And as a team, you also have designers, artists, programmers, testers, sound designers, anything that helps you produce the product at the end. And then the last stage, you have post-production, where you have as input the product or whatever you created during your production phase, and then you polish it. You eventually market it, and maybe you even test it. So that could be beta testing, that could be early access, or just like already release it and distribute it to the universe. And here you usually have a marketing team, there you have testers, you have marketing, you also have community management. And all this basically comes with the gigantic, huge disclaimer, right? So some projects have more stages, some have less, some don't have any stages at all and just wing it and are successful with it, right? So it all really depends on scope and budget. And some projects just like merge all the stages into one another and or overlap them. Some do post-production doing like marketing doing pre-production. Some don't really have a pre-production and immediately jump into production. So there's a lot of disclaimers to be added here. So some projects do marketing very early, some projects don't do marketing. So you see there are a lot of disclaimers just coming up. And that's fine. But this is where I want to take it a step back and go easy mode. So we can talk a bit better about it. So in a sense, if we break it down to the nitty-gritty, we have a problem, which could be, as I said, the group of people that are craving a certain game, which let's say that's the ultimate Barbie beat 'em up, whatever, or some other game. And you do some research. This is the prototyping phase, where you do the formalization, the materialization. This is usually the prototyping phase in itself, and then you evaluate, and then you release it. So you go from the problem with the research in the middle to the solution then. And this is in the most simplest form, the game development pipeline for almost any game. So you can generalize it more like this. Okay, I hope this was understandable for a first overview, just to get the perspective shift a bit from the very nitty-gritty to the broader picture of, okay, I'm actually creating a product over here if I want to make it financially successful, right? Because you can always create a game with different ambitions in mind. So now we go from idea to prototype, which I hope will be interesting to you, because we want to make our ideas tangible. And to do that, we are usually searching for some sort of purpose in why we are doing this. So we are kind of asking again why we prototype. And in the essence, prototyping is an early, unrefined version of your product designed to gather feedback. So what you're really doing is you're becoming of something like a researcher, or I don't know, maybe scientist, who really is trying to figure out, is this product, is this thing I'm building really a solution, or is this maybe next to the solution? Is even someone there who cares about it? And prototyping is basically a structured way to check for an efficient solution. There are a few different use cases for prototypes. For example, validating a concept, then fundraising for a startup, or maybe even pitching it to a publisher, selling a new product, feature, service. It can also be a tool for negotiation. This can be, again, with the publisher. This can be with a bigger crowd. This can be with the team. It could be reaching a shared understanding or vision. Or you could use it before you redesign a product, or after a merge or acquisition of some other companies, and to just figure things out, basically. Um, yeah. In the essence, it's the most effective way of knowing how a product will perform in the market before it performs. So, oh, the horror, what is a good prototype, right? Because um, it does happen, in my experience, more often that you build something and then in the end you realize, oh my god, what did I do? Is this even leading somewhere? And if you're kind of in between, oh yeah, this is what I created is great, to, oh no, what did I do? And then you're indifferent, then I hope I can help you with this talk, because um, it all comes down to having a structure. So a good prototype lets you test what you want to explore, evaluate what you want to learn, and inspires and motivates. So, and it all kind of trickles down to it having a good structure, and seeing it as a tool that helps you to find out more about um, people in the essence. So just to figure out, is this really a solution? It can come in many forms. They're usually all tangible. Now, this is basically derived from product development in general. For digital, it's a bit harder, but let's say for board games or tabletop games in general, you do usually have a tangible form, something, like the first blocks with which you can prototype. And the prototypes don't have to be primitive versions. They can be sketches, they can be mock-ups. Some say mock-ups or sketches are not prototypes, but I think they are part of the prototyping process in general. It could be interactive mock-ups, paper prototypes, hardware prototypes, maybe not so applicable for gaming. Depends again, simple stripped down working game, website or system. And one of my personal favorites is the Wizard of Oz prototyping, or for example, role play. This could be interesting, for example, live action RPG. Wizard of Oz prototyping is when you, for example, have uh, it's basically a make believe where you give someone a software and in the back end it behaves completely different and there's not much functionality, but you give out feedback so to make it appear to the tester as if the application is working, to see how they interact with it. So the reality is then someone manually pulling the strings in the back end. And there also exists something like VR prototyping. This is again maybe not so applicable for games because this could be, for example, when you want to build a theme park and you have not built it yet, but then you build it quickly in VR and then go through the theme park with the VR glasses on, and then you can look at the theme park from inside before it's built. And what's really important is that you pick the right prototype for the right purpose. Now, the right prototype for the right purpose, the purpose is only something you can decide, but the right prototype, it depends on what you want to test. So, the higher the design requirements and the technical complexity, the more likely you will have to spend a lot of time building your prototype. For example, a low fidelity user prototype is for quickly testing something and being able to throw it away, or well, keep it, whatever. But you usually want to test different things with different prototypes. For example, with low fidelity user prototypes, you would want to test a value proposition. With high fidelity user prototypes, usability, and with live data prototypes, maybe the behavior. And you usually want to have it proven with data, maybe for the developers that need proof, really. And with the feasibility prototype, you're more testing the technical limitations before committing any resources and while defining the scope of the project. So, for example, this is a prototype you want to build relatively early before, for example, talking with publishers. This is usually what you would start building. And maybe at some point have it lean over into the direction of high fidelity user prototypes. So there are many different methods of how you can prototype, and I've picked you out the most common ones. Not everyone is applicable to games in itself. There are many, many more, but I thought these were the most interesting ones. So the first one is rapid prototyping. This is to have something or to create something tangible that you can, really touch with usually 3D printing. And what you do is to basically build small parts or modules that you then assemble into bigger ones so that you can test one piece at a time. Then you have the throwaway method where the goal is to primarily learn something, and then when you learn that thing, then you can throw it away. And then you have proof of concept, which is usually just to validate and could be a visualization. You have field tests, which again could be interesting for live action RPGs, or yeah, this is kind of the only use case I could think of. But the key factor is that it's testing in the real world. And then you have incremental, and this is basically where you are building a block approach, kind of where you add and test components and then add them together to a more complex model or solution over time. And then you have the evolutionary method, which is or could even be your minimum viable product. This then depends on your scope, kind of. And it's usually a functional piece and not just a simulation, and it evolves over time. So this is where your prototype 1.0, prototype 1.1, prototype 1.2, and so on comes from. So this is really just stacking up. So am I a tester too is usually a question I hear. And it's kind of a dynamic builder and user, so the developer versus the user. And what I think is a fun way of describing it is, for example, if you imagine that you are building, I mean, for example, a farming house and or a barn, I don't know, farming house. And when you build it yourself, you usually notice, or you kind of know where you were not quite, where you didn't really nail it. For example, if you're building something like a house, something big, and you step outside and you look at it, then you can usually see what went wrong and what went right. For example, if like the roof is not really, all well, or it looks wrong. So you might have people who are afraid to enter it. So let's imagine you get a tester to test your farming house. And what they would do is to open the door, and then suddenly the door and the door handle would break up and the whole thing crashes down and burns, kind of situation. So this is kind of the thing where we sometimes notice that things are not right and that we did a few mistakes. um, but then the question becomes, should we then still bring testers in to test our crumbling farmhouse? And in my opinion, the answer is yes and no. So I created a checklist. I call it the before I bother a tester checklist, where you basically check um, kind of the fundamentals before you waste your time and resources, or you waste the time of someone else. The first thing is to have a realistic scope. That is just really important in my opinion. And to figure that out, there are different methods on the internet. You can probably look them up. But what I like to do is to write every function that I want to have in my game on a piece of paper, or that I imagine inside of my game on a piece of paper, then put them all out, and then remove papers until I'm at the bare minimum, where I cannot if I would remove another paper, then everything would just not work anymore. Then it would not be a game anymore. So um, that is also really cool if you do the method of two, where you basically take walk, and then you add another functionality to it, for example, a camera movement. And then you would always add two features again, or test two features at once to get a better overview as well. And then do you have a compulsion or core loop? So core loop is maybe a bit something that more people know, but it's basically something like walk, kill, receive a reward. And then the compulsion loop is kind of sometimes confused with the core loop, but it's basically the psychology behind it, where you get dopamine from anticipation, so anticipating the reward, and then you have dopamine release once you receive the reward. Then you have the hook habit hobby, which, if we remain with the barn house that we've built, if it looks from the outside really, really crappy, um, no one is probably wanting to enter this. So it's kind of similar with any product we build. If the product is not appealing, if there's no hook, then people will not like to use it. So you need to give incentives so people will want to use whatever you have built. For example, with our barn house that looks as if it's about to fall apart, this will be very difficult. But let's say we give someone an incentive and say, okay, if you enter my super crappy barn house, whatever farmhouse, we're not good in building farmhouses, then I give you, let's say, 3 million uh, dollar, whatever. And if that person says yes, and then they enter the barn and are really unhappy and walk out, then we have at least one person who have used our product, even though it's maybe crappy. And what we want to do is to get them from hooked to making it a habit, and then reuse the barn house and walk around in that barn or whatever for forever, and make it their hobby. With this house, it's probably going to be really hard, so we need to give more incentive. For example, marketing it correctly as, oh my god, this is the most dangerous thing you will ever experience, and somehow build a kick around it in that way. um, but that is just like part of the psychology on how you frame it and how you set expectations. Then the learning loop is a pleasurable activity loop that helps your customers get better at something they care about. And the mastery, it should be mastery path here, not mastery loop, is the experience your customer unlock as they get better at using your product. So this could be for example, RPGs, that you start out with just being able to use a dagger or certain skills, and then you unlock more skills down the road. And what's also really important is the user experience, not to confuse with the UI. But what I mean with this is, if your let's say if your start button is not even clickable at the beginning and your users cannot even test your game or product, then you need to have it on a level so it can become testable. So so much for the checklist. Uh, but before we now dive into the evaluating part, it's really important to make that distinction between um, expert evaluation and user evaluation. So we as game developers are usually very much on the expert side, where we look really deeply into what is feeling great, and what's like the behind the scenes things. We get really nitty gritty and look at the mechanics and analyze everything. While on the other side, the users, um, they really usually have no clue why things are feeling great for them, or why something is awesome or is fun to them. For example, um, if you ask a user about, hey, do you like the interface, then you have a chance of them giving you feedback on everything else. Basically controls. Yeah, the UI is fun to look at, but you really need to frame your questions so that you get the exact answers that you need. So there you can differentiate between working and evaluating together with experts, or bringing uh, kind of mediocre normal users in, who you then have to present more of a smaller scenario with probably a questionnaire or something, and somehow get your feedback from these then. So I hope this was understandable. Looking at the time, I think we are good, because we are now talking about the evaluation. And I really want to, I'm not sure if my nerdy jokes are lost on you, but to go from a red shirt to a blue shirt and become more of a scientist and planning your research when you want to evaluate your prototype. So it's kind of time to be scientific and look at the risks and the research. So, um, yeah. Um, so there is no cookie cutter set of indicators or methods to evaluate a prototype. I think this is really important to mention. The evaluation needs to be somewhat different for each game you build, or product or service. Some are similar, some are really the same, and some are widely different. There are, however, certain guiding principles, I want to say, with things that are remaining, or are key pillars that we can look at. So one is that it has to be relevant. This means the method must be designed to answer the key questions of the prototyping team. Then precision. This means that, for example, what we talked about with the fidelity, the low fidelity and high fidelity, that the prototype needs to make sense in the amount of detail you put in. Um, yeah. And oh, yeah, one also very important factor is that the team, so the development team, needs to receive the feedback that you get out of this, and this is also part of the precision. Then it also needs to be appropriate in how much resources you allocate. So this means burden of proof. If you are building something very, very small where you don't have really any risks or any stakes or don't really have any efforts that you have to put in to develop this product, then you don't need such a big burden of proof where you need to basically, you know, prove that what you're building has value. And the more risks and the more investment is involved, the higher you want that burden of proof. And this could be then very big productions or very, you know, very elaborate testing processes. And during me building our current program where we help developers, I interviewed a few game developers, which was really fun because I've got to hear a lot of anecdotes, also one about testing. And one relatively big game, a shooter, where how they would test is basically have a big room, and then they have behind a glass or mirror wall the developer looking into the room, and then inside of the room they would have PCs that they would put up and then invite testers who each would then have their own camera that would film them. For example, I think it was 3 cameras, one for the hands, one for the face, and no, I think 2 for the hands. Not sure. But then they would film them to really make sure that they got all the visual cues that they needed in order to really test this. And what they found out was really fun because one tester said that that he really liked when the game slowed down with each headshot he made. And what the interesting part about this was that that was not implemented at all. So he just imagined that whenever he made a headshot, that the game would slow down, and that was just not there. So it's just something he imagined to be there. And so this is where it can also be a bit tricky about listening to your users. But what happened then is that they liked the idea and implemented it because he mentioned it. So long story short, it's really good to make sure that if you have a really big production, that you also have a really um, good thought through testing environment. Then the quality and interactivity. So this is basically how functional your prototype is, and then timely, how fast you can make your results available to your team. You usually want it to be in real time so that the information that you get can go immediately into the development. And then basically the evolution, which is just the life cycle of the prototype where you, um, you know, um, just develop and develop and until you're satisfied. Okay, so the evaluation process step by step. It's 6 steps. The first one is to collect and analyze user information. This is usually where you want to find out people or figure out people that are really needing your solution, right? Because we talked about it that you're with your game creating a solution for people who have that really big need. And you can do this with like interviews, with surveys, cold calling. You really just need to collect and analyze the user information. Then you build the prototype, and then you decide what you want to test or what parts you want to test from your prototype. And for really important, create a preliminary design and prepare your test scenarios and questions. So with your questions, they are usually kind of what's guiding you through the process in a sense, because they are what help you to evaluate what you're creating. Here you also want to have your preferred data sources and methods specified. Then when and how is the feedback gathered, and key things to consider to make the tests effective. There can also be logistics involved. So, for example, if you really have someone else conducting the testing, where they don't know as much of the game, or for example, they need clipboards to conduct the testing. So this all falls into logistics. And then step 6, you initiate the user evaluation. And what you want to do is to basically plan, then you do, then you study, and then you act. So the planning would be what you do when planning your prototype, planning your research, planning your interviews. Then you do the testing part. Then you study what you learn from these, and then you act on it and maybe implement it, make decisions, or so on. And this is ironically called the plan, do, study, act cycle. um, okay, so now we can look at how to plan your research. This is really interesting because you want to look at the who, what, when, where, and why. And as I already said, the questions form kind of the foundation of evaluating your prototype. So ideally, you will look over your early market hypothesis and find early adopters for your MVP already. So it's really critical to figure out who you're bringing on for your first low fidelity testing. So this could be then the amount of people with this amount of characteristics that you want to have. Then you also want to figure out which assumptions you are going to test with your prototype. You don't just want to test any assumptions, but the ones that you are most curious about, where you really need validation from. And then the when, and also if there are some sort of gatekeeping events that are stopping you from prototype from testing, and how long and for how many days the prototyping the testing is supposed to be. Then the where, this could be geographic location, online, in person, this could be phone. This could be at a convention, for example, if you're an indie developer and have a booth. And then the why, this is usually kind of the same for all prototypes. It's to tune your core systems to get feedback. Okay. And then you have the questions you kind of want to ask when you're going into the evaluation. And you want to write these down before you even think about evaluating or going any further. And I categorize them into prototype, the challenge you are facing as a team, and then the team itself. So, for example, this could be questions like, uh, to what extent is the prototype likely to be effective in achieving what we want to achieve, or is it feasible in the real world? This could be social, economic. This could be all kinds of things. Is it viable? Is it supported? Supported would mean if you have, for example, the backing of a publisher or a big fan base, basically someone who wants to see this succeed. And is it scalable? Scalable in a sense, I always like to think of it as kind of the opposite of scoping, where you want to see if how can I make this, how can I give this more value in the future. Then the challenge. So what did we learn in this testing phase? Did it give us more broad context? Do we have more understanding of the system behind it? And then the team. So this is really interesting because it's like very much focusing on the development team. Did we reach our capacity? Do we need to bring in new artists? Do we need to switch out programmers? So stuff like this. And then also change in work relationships. So this doesn't mean like relationships in the sense of boyfriend and girlfriend or whatever, but in the sense of uh, do I need to restructure my team to be able to uh, evolve my prototype? Okay. Then there are also evaluation methods. um, as I already said, the questions form the foundation of an evaluation. Um, Here, you really want to figure out what method works for you and your game specifically. I don't want to go all that in depth here, but you really want to pick and choose. Sometimes you may even take multiple methods of figuring out some feedback. For example, you can get real time feedback. You can have a more kind of role play aspect in it where you build two teams where one team is, for example, the blue team, one team is a red team. And then you let one team defend your, for example, prototype, and one team attack it in the sense of verbally attacking. And then you have both sides of the feedback. What I also like are speed interviews. So you first do a short survey. This is if I would develop a game, this is how I would do it now. I would do speed interviews, usually short surveys, where I first screen through a certain amount of people and figure out if they are a fit, and then follow this up by a speed interview, very short, and make sure that I attract high value, high need customers or early adopters. Okay, so then you want to plan your interview and prototyping. So what this means is once you are so far that you have some data already and already have something to show, you want to have sometimes even a script ready to talk with people about it. So this could be, for example, if you're an indie developer again and having a booth, and then there's your game and it's displayed, and then you kind of want to be able to talk about your game. And this could be a product brief, something like your elevator pitch in a sense. So you always want to include this in your interviews. This could also be the same in any speed interviews you're leading. Then you want to plan your interviews, right? Because also at a convention, you're even if you're standing next to it, you either want to be an observer and silent and not bias your users, right? So you also don't want to be, like the one that's looking over their shoulders and like, okay, are you enjoying? Like, is this really good? You want to have a plan when going into these things. Otherwise, you might run the risk of biasing your testers. And then with that, you bias your research. And that is really not something that you want to do. So, as I already said, you could do a screening. So you really want to figure out who, what, when, where, and why in terms of interviews. Then you also want to figure out important existing behavior patterns or habits of the people that you interviewed to just find a commonality. And once you have done all that, you want to plan your prototype and what exactly you want to test or trying to validate. So this is what high risk assumptions will you test in your playtest. And it usually should be a high risk assumption, because if not, then it's kind of becoming the question: are you wasting your resources when you can already kind of say it with just a gut feeling that it's not going to work? Then plan your playtest. I put this again differently to the plan your interviews, because not everyone you are going to interview, for example, not everyone you're talking with at a convention should be invited to your playtests in a sense. So there again, you also want to basically, if you're looking at it from a filter, you first want to have the, for example, the screening where the broad majority of people will be. Then you want to have the speed interviews, and the people who get through the speed interviews, these you invite to your playtests. And then you will basically ask yourself which early customers or which people will participate in these playtests. Okay, then we are already at the playtesting phase stage. And playtests are tests where potential customers experience your product in some form and give you feedback. I think 1 hour testing sessions are really good, and that you should pay the people that test for you, because I think then you get the most valuable feedback. A good default rate is 50 euros an hour, but it can also be 25 to 100 euros or dollar. And you can also use something like Amazon gift cards or something like that. That also works. For me personally, I think it's really important to pay, because it's you'll find more value in testers you pay for your testing, because they are more obliged to give you feedback, or good feedback. Then have a warm-up interview before your playtest. This is really good, because you want to ease people into the whole playtesting session. And this could be something like, tell me more about your experiences with, then you put the relevant activity and maybe some follow-up questions from, for example, your speed interviews. And then go on with something like, now you're going to describe the upcoming test activity. So this could be, now you're going to play my game, which is about blah, 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 blah. And what we need is honest input. So tell us what's going through your head, good or bad, so that you also are interested in the bad, in the negatives. Because what sometimes happens is, if a tester realizes that they are talking with the game developer, they're more hesitant to give negative feedback, because they don't want to hurt your feelings. But you want the negative feedback. Then you also want to have a session plan. So the session plan is basically a plan on how you conduct your research, and if it will be solo or in groups, or if it's remote or on site, and so on. And also who's involved. And then you want to have also a playtesting script. This is really important if you want someone else to do the testing for you, which is something you usually want if you're the game developer, because someone who's more detached from your game will just talk differently about your game. And they are less likely to influence or bias your testers. And then in the end, you want to summarize your findings. And you really want to answer basically which of your initial ideas were validated, and what did the people like, dislike, get excited about, what did testers dislike or respond poorly to, and what were the most surprising things you've learned, and then incorporate these into your decisions. So now you get to the last part, which is making the decisions and then adapting and implementing. So you really, after testing, you probably will realize that it's not as easy, that it's not just plan the work, then then work the plan. And it's usually that you then have realizations about what you've actually created. And this could be that the design you created is just not good. This could be that you will have more questions afterward. This could be that you need to evolve your prototype. So the evaluation for any prototype is a work in progress. The design co-evolves as quickly or as slowly as the questions and data allows. So in a sense, it all trickles down to your resources and budget somehow, because the more you can test and the faster you can test, this usually requires some form of resources. And then once you've done all that, you can make decisions, right? Because as I already said, the plan do what was it? Wow. Well, in the end, you want to base it in your study, right? So there are multiple ways you can go. You usually have this idea, and then you prototype and test it, and either you have this moment where you notice, okay, I need to keep testing, or you make a spin-off, and then you can make a pilot project and then scale it. Or you notice, it's not really feeling right, but I'm somehow on the right track. Then you can evolve it and do another round of testing, and then maybe make a spin-off, and then a pilot, and then scale. Or maybe you come to the realization, okay, what I'm building is really not working. I don't find people who are interested in this. Then I will need to discard it and maybe come up with a different idea. So yeah, this is basically how the prototype evolution would then be. So to give you a short summary, I really hope you got some value out of this talk. Um, Try sometimes maybe to look at the game development process more of, from a production or product development world, where you see the bigger picture and where it's going. I hope this is what I could bring to you today. And of course, now you know how to somehow on a very um, broad level know how to build your prototype and structure your research. And yeah, keep testing. And thank you for your attention. And thank you for listening. Oh yeah, and if you want to work with us, as I already said, I'm leading art outsourcing agency, and we're always looking for branding experts or other people who are interested in working with us, or just if you need art for your game, feel free to hit me up. Okay, and then what software tools do you like to use to track your testing feedback? Um, I personally really like Notion, but I think just an Excel sheet is probably sufficient as long as you can keep it structured. Um, I think that is really the most important part, to keep it as structured as possible. I personally use Notion for almost everything, so this is my go-to thing because I can embed a lot of things and also have somewhat of a database backend with a lot of automation going from one app to another. And you could even use Notion as something like in the middle, and then have a survey and connect us with Notion, and then connect Notion with Google Drive or something. So you can really um, automate a lot there. But you could probably just leave Notion out of it and also directly make a survey automate to a Google spreadsheet. That probably also works. I hope that answered your question. Um, Overall, I would say it's what works best for you and your team. In a sense, if you're planning to make a bigger project, then you always need to keep in account that it also needs to scale with the size of your team. So if you then at one point are a bigger team, then you can't really you can use the same tools, but some tools make it harder for bigger teams. Any tips on deciding when you've done enough testing, or how not to get stuck in a perpetual loop of tests? Evolve, test, evolve. Yeah. So, funnily enough, usually you are not the one, or well, sometimes you're the one who makes the decision that you just stop. Usually it's when your budget runs out, in a way. That's at least my experience, when you are not able to find more people who want to invest into your idea. This is usually when you're kind of forced to stop the testing, or then you kind of make it somewhat your hobby and have a job at the side and fund your own kind of prototype evolution that you can do as well. So that is one thing. But for example, if you do it and self fund completely, then it would probably, when it feels right, if that makes sense. There is not something like, "Okay, now it's finished," right? Because a game in itself is never really completely finished. You just decide at one point, "Okay, this is as far as I want to go," and everything else, you know, there's always the thing with delivering updates, right? So even a live game is never really finished because it gets updates sometimes. And it's kind of the same here. You could, quote unquote, already release it, but that does not mean necessarily that it's finished. There's like these whole spectrum of early access games that are already out, that are not really finished, but they are kind of finished, if you understand what I mean. Yeah, so lots of games that launch in beta or early access that never really are finished. So, that's the thing. Sometimes that's beneficial, so that's also a marketing decision, um, where you work with the expectations because expectation management is a really big part in this all. If people are, for example, hearing AAA production, they expect a wildly different product when you say, "Oh, this is one person who did this uh, 2 days in a row or something in a game jam." Then the expectations will just be different. Um, and this actually helps when marketing your game. So, yeah. But yeah, the answer is you decide when you stop. Yeah, glad glad it's helping you. Mhm. Do you have any games you're currently working on where you see that this could be helpful to you? Maybe I'll ask the questions now. Just my curiosity. Hmm, okay, but oh, yeah. Okay, I'm glad I could help you. Okay. Um, yeah, so if there are no more questions, then thank you for listening. Thank you for enjoying and being patient with the talk. Um, yeah, okay, then I'll see you around, I suppose.